Advanced Conqueror's Haki, the apex of power wielded only by a handful of the very strongest. It's in the middle of his fight against Kaido that Luffy awakens this power to shoot him up amongst the strongest in the world. Fast forward to a flashback and a revelation, and Zoro awakens as the King of Hell, wielding the same power as his captain. Which would surely make them equal, right? No. But if they aren't, how close are they really? That is the question we'll be trying to answer today in this video. Now, a quick disclaimer before we start, but this is not going to be your standard versus battle, but rather it's asking what is the weakest version of Luffy that Zoro could take on in a fight. So the options would either be base, gear 2, gear 3, gear 4, or gear 5. In a normal battle scenario, Luffy would probably just go gear 5 regardless of whether he really needs it to win, especially against someone as strong as Zoro. Now, I won't be trying to mix and match gears with Haki either, so no, Zoro can be a gear 2 Luffy that doesn't use Future Sight, but does use Rio, but doesn't use Advanced Conqueror's Haki or something like that, because truthfully, I am not doing all that. So bear in mind, Luffy, no matter which version I'm talking about, has all Hakis available to him. And with all that out the way, I think it's finally time we actually get into the main shit. So without further ado, let's get into how close Zoro really is compared to Luffy. Now, to gauge how strong either Zoro or Luffy are, we must first tackle their strength prior to their aforementioned Conqueror's Haki buffs. Why? Because the level of a person's Conqueror's Haki is in fact dependent on the user's strength, which would mean it also holds true for Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Now, looking back on the fight at the Rooftop, so before their Conqueror's Haki buffs, I noticed a surprisingly close performance between Luffy and Zoro on my reread. Now, I'm going to split Rooftop Zoro into 3 versions, which have varying levels of power. The first one, this is Zoro initially at the start of the chapter of 1001, where he lands a Purgatory Onigiri but cannot cut a base Kaido, but he does plan on unleashing Enma a bit more. He eventually does so, and this is the version we will be comparing to the post-Rio training Gear 4 Luffy, because the Zoro after this wouldn't actually be pre-Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but we'll get into that soon enough. The second version of Zoro then makes Big Mom caution Kaido about the power of his Flying Dragon Blaze, and in the anime at least makes him dodge, which is quite a crazy feat considering Kaido doesn't really go out of his way to dodge any attacks that he deems too weak, just like Gear 4 Luffy in Act 1, and Luffy himself makes a note of this in a later chapter. The same Zoro then manages to cut Kaido's scales, which Gear 4 Luffy previously had trouble getting through in Act 1. And lastly, the third main feat of the Zoro would be him momentarily blocking Kaido and Big Mom's combined attack in Ocean Sovereignty. Very, very impressive, but it leads to him having 20 to 30 broken bones because of it, and he is now severely weakened. And it's here where we get to the third version of Zoro, and that is the Rooftop Zoro, which manages to permanently scar Kaido after beating him in a clash and blitzing past him. It's his biggest feat on the Rooftop, but as I was alluding to before, this Zoro is already using the buff given by Advanced Conqueror's Haki. I understand this point is a bit contentious amongst some fans, so I'll be dedicating this next section just to proving why this Zoro is in fact using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Firstly, Zoro used Asura while letting Enma take all of his Haki, as seen with him saying that Asura would be the limit of his ability, and with Enma surging with Haki. That should ring a bell because what else works by letting Enma take all of your Haki? It's Zoro's King of Hell mode. In the same way Zoro achieves Advanced Conqueror's Haki in King of Hell by letting Enma take his Haki constantly and stabilizing it, Zoro achieves the same result by letting Enma take all of his Haki in Asura. Secondly, Kaido's scar is permanent. The only person we've seen achieve that is none other than Kozuki Oden, who at the time most likely used Advanced Conqueror's Haki on Kaido. Note that the 4 Akazaya samurai who performed the Paradise Totsuka with Internal Destruction could not scar Kaido permanently, and Luffy, even himself, caused his Internal Destruction in Gear 4 too shallow meaning that Zoro had to have used something beyond both those in order to scar Kaido permanently, as well as Oden, which has to be Advanced Conqueror's Haki. And finally, let me take you back to Luffy versus Kaido in Act 1, where Luffy performs a Kong Organ on Kaido, and then gets decimated after like 2 pages. If you remember, you'll know Kaido didn't comment on Luffy being a Conqueror's Haki user until after he was knocked out, and knocked out the beast pirates that were trying to arrest him. It's only then that Kaido realizes that Luffy was a Conqueror's Haki user all along, meaning he couldn't discern it when he was hit by the Kong Organ the first time by Luffy, because it wasn't advanced. So when Kaido is finally able to tell that Zoro does have Conqueror's Haki, it means that he had to be using the advanced version, especially since Zoro had already cut Kaido with his Tatsumaki, and Kaido wasn't able to discern that Zoro had Conqueror's Haki then either. Bit of a tangent there, but I did feel the need to clarify that. So let's tread back to the second version of Zoro that I discussed and compare him to the Luffy prior to his Conqueror's Haki buffs. So who's stronger? Well, combined with the fact that Luffy probably should be stronger than his subordinate at any given time, the Gear 4 Gatling gun is the superior showing compared to Zoro's Tatsumaki or Flying Dragon Blaze. It put Dragon Form Kaido down for a prolonged period of time, and there's just a lot of emphasis on this moment by Oda by making it a couple of panels long, as well as Big Mom's overall reaction and her calling it quite the demonstration. To be fair to Zoro though, he also got Big Mom to make quite a few reaction panels himself, with, like I said, the Flying Dragon Blaze, and then also when he actually cut Kaido's scales, not just the bit that's in front of his dragon body, like what the Akazaya Samurai did. So like I said before, quite close in showing, but I am still giving it to Luffy for the reasons above. So, pre-Advanced Conqueror's Haki Luffy is stronger than a pre-Advanced Conqueror's Haki Zoro, and your Conqueror's Haki is proportional to the user's strength, like I said before, meaning that the buff Luffy gets from unlocking Advanced Conqueror's Haki is bigger than the buff Zoro gets from unlocking Advanced Conqueror's Haki. To give that point a more numerical perspective, let's say Luffy before his Conqueror's Haki buff was a 10 in strength and Zoro a 9. Then when Luffy gets his Advanced Conqueror's Haki buff, he'd get a +5 in points, whereas Zoro would only get 4, since the buff is relative to their strength. And therefore you'd also find that the gap between them would increase as well. Now what we can gather from that is that current Zoro therefore cannot beat and is hard capped at current Gear 4 Luffy with all of his Hakis, because prior to Advanced Conqueror's Haki, Gear 4 Luffy was already stronger than Zoro, and now we can finally shift the question to whether Gear 3, Gear 2 or base Luffy can be beaten by Zoro. Okay, then it's very simple. Base Luffy put Kaido on his back when Zoro couldn't, both with Advanced Conqueror's Haki, so Luffy cooks him. But it's not that simple. For one, there's 2 things working against Zoro in his moment against Kaido, the first being that he's got 20 to 30 broken bones, and second, his level of Advanced Conqueror's Haki was not the same as it is right now. Currently, when he does use Advanced Conqueror's Haki in King of Hell specifically, you can actually see the lightning coming off his swords, implying that there's a different level of Advanced Conqueror's Haki achieved with King of Hell as opposed to the one in Asura. However, Luffy's level of Advanced Conqueror's Haki was too not the same as it is now. Kaido, after beating Luffy after his initial Conqueror's Haki buff, calls his use of Conqueror's Haki infusion crude and clumsy. The manga actually off-screens the fight, so we're just gonna have to use Toei here to help us out a bit, and they've only got him using Gear 3 for 1 Red Rock and just kept Luffy in base the whole time essentially, and it gets Kaido slightly out of breath. It's then this base / Gear 3 using Luffy that then comes back against Kaido and truly goes toe to toe with him after adding a lot more finesse to his Advanced Conqueror's Haki, and even forces Kaido to make him strengthen his Haki. And so if you know that Zoro's capped at Gear 4 Luffy, the question now essentially becomes, how does Zoro stack up against this base / Gear 3 using Luffy that fights Kaido and even manages to split the sky with him? Look, I'm going to set a scale for you which I have spent like the past 5 days crafting, okay? And there are 2 characters which I just cannot decide where I'm going to be putting, so I am in fact letting you, the viewer, decide on where they go. But I am giving you parameters because they can't just go anywhere. And it will be those 2 placements that basically decide what version of Luffy Zoro can beat, if any. The two characters I'm talking about are King and King of Hell Zoro. Hopefully you already understand that Zoro is stronger than King going into this. Now I established before that Rio Rooftop Luffy is stronger than Rooftop Zoro, but the difference isn't too massive in my personal opinion. So starting from there, Rooftop Luffy is stronger than Rooftop Zoro. Now this one may be a bit controversial, but I've got Yamato and then Asura Zoro. However, this Asura Zoro doesn't have 20 to 30 broken bones and is fully healed. Otherwise, Yamato would absolutely decimate him right after. Now I've got them positioned like this only because we see this Zoro clash with Hybrid Kaido, and then Kaido is ultimately beaten in said clash, blitzed, and then given a permanent scar. Whereas Yamato doesn't really push Kaido all too much and can't really get the edge on him like Zoro did. You could have them interchanged, however, especially if you think that Yamato surpasses Zoro's speed by matching Kaido's Thunder Bagua. Speaking of fighting Hybrid Kaido though, we haven't seen Gear 4 Rio Luffy fighting him in any capacity other than when Kaido was in base or full dragon form, but I'm still gonna have him below the advanced Conqueror's Haki users, especially since he calls his own Rio on its own too shallow, and then outshines his previous Gear 4 self in base, making me put a lot of stock in the advanced Conqueror's Haki buff. However, it is at Asura Zoro where I have the cap for King. It's valid to have him anywhere below that point, but I'm almost certain he isn't stronger than Asura Zoro because again, the buff from Advanced Conqueror's Haki is massive, and I imagine it isn't too far off his King of Hell mode either, since like I said before, they work the exact same. And so I don't have him over Yamato either because once again, the Advanced Conqueror's Haki buff is just that good, and he's got the speed to match a Thunder Bagua from Kaido, and therefore the speed and attack power necessary to force King to use his flame off mode and deal damage. King for me then is somewhere in between Yamato and Rio Gear 4 Luffy. Being able to parry named King of Hell attacks from Zoro with his flame on convinces me, as well as S-Bear taking attacks from this Gear 4 Luffy and Lucci and being completely fine. I don't doubt Luffy has the speed to force him into flame off mode, especially with Future Sight and Snake Man a couple of times, but I think his attack power would be a little bit too shallow, especially since he's taking Advanced Conqueror's Haki attacks from Zoro. Though I wouldn't be angry if he said that he does with Internal Destruction. Which now leaves us with 3 more characters left to scale, stronger than Asura Zoro. Base Luffy after chapter 1010, Base Luffy after chapter 1026, and King of Hell Zoro. While Zoro could not put Kaido on his back in Asura, Luffy after initially learning Advanced Conqueror's Haki manages to do so in just 2 punches. I imagine Oda made Zoro say that line to highlight the difference in power between the two. Skip forward 3 chapters and this Luffy however gets sent crashing down into the sea, but not after leaving Kaido a bit asthmatic, which is a better result compared to what Yamato achieved against him, making this Luffy stronger than both Asura Zoro and Yamato. And finally, we have the current base Luffy / Gear 3 Luffy that can split the sky with Kaido and force him to amp himself, and that has added more finesse to his Advanced Conqueror's Haki. King of Hell Zoro has to be stronger than the Asura one for obvious reasons, and the question now becomes, where does this King of Hell Zoro lie in comparison to the 2 Luffys I just named? Well, to be honest, I don't think he's even touching the current base Luffy, I'm sorry. I have current Zoro at full strength relative to base Luffy from chapter 10,010. Zoro in King of Hell has managed to stabilize his Haki in King of Hell better than this Luffy I figure, but the power from Luffy's internal destruction makes up for any lack of finesse or stability, and if not, probably goes a bit beyond that. That is my final answer. Zoro could technically be in between current Gear 3 and 4 Luffy, but me personally, I really can't imagine that scenario. I just don't think he's reached a level where he can split the sky. That's synonymous with the Emperors of the Sea, and instead lies in the tier below with Yamato, Green Bull, Fujitora, etc. Somewhere where most admirals lie. Like I said, it basically depends on where you have King on the scale, to be honest. If you've got him above Yamato, for example, King of Hell Zoro would scale a lot higher than I have him, and maybe he gets up to current base Luffy. However, it comes down to what you think Oda's intentions are, portrayal if you will, because sometimes the feats just aren't there for you to analyze. And of course, vibes as well at the end of the day. Let's keep it real. Okay, so little section at the end of the video here I just wanted to discuss. So they just released a new Vivre card which has Zoro on it, okay? And in the Vivre card, they've got him as having confirmed haki and okay, if you didn't okay, Vivre cards, by the way, if you didn't know, they're basically just like extra they're like data books kind of that give a little bit of information about you know, the characters and stuff, sometimes used to push certain narratives depending on if they support them or not. You know, it's just a data book essentially, okay? And they've got Zoro as a confirmed armament user and observation user, but they don't have him confirmed as a Conqueror's Haki user, and it's got people kind of riled up. It's got some people saying, oh, he doesn't have Conqueror's Haki, you know, something like that. But I just wanted to give my take on it since I've been seeing a lot of discussion around it. And so, you know, I caught this tweet. I said, you know, they're gonna cook you, but Zoro not knowing he's using advanced Conqueror's Haki makes sense. It also depends on how you interpret his answer to King's question. Zoro replying with what implies King's question came out of nowhere to him, even though he just used advanced Conqueror's Haki to knock out some beast pirates. It should be obvious to Zoro that King was talking about his advanced Conqueror's Haki use, but Zoro interprets it as his goal to become the world's greatest swordsman instead, which still makes sense as an answer, but I don't think Zoro's really comprehending what King is asking. So you intend to be a king then is also a really vague question and leaves more to interpretation compared to don't tell me you can use Conqueror's Haki, which was asked by Kaido over here. So that's basically my thoughts in like 3 little tweets. Basically, what I'm saying is I don't think Zoro knows that he's using advanced Conqueror's Haki, and therefore he isn't a user of it, essentially because he doesn't know what he's doing, which I think makes sense, right? I think that's what was being applied in this tweet. But essentially, yeah. So if we look at what Kaido asked here, he basically asks in this panel, do you have Conqueror's Haki or not? And Zoro replies with, I don't know what you're talking about. And then we skip forward a bit, and King asks, so you intend to be a king then, which is a lot more vague. It just leaves a lot more room for interpretation than, you know, straight up, do you have Conqueror's Haki, yes or no? So then Zoro replies with what? And then he doesn't relate this question with Conqueror's Haki, but instead relates it to his goal of world's greatest swordsman, right? That's what I gather from this. It's not that I think this question was purposely vague so that Zoro could, you know, draw out his own meaning rather than just a straight up, do you have Conqueror's Haki, yes or no? This question is just a lot more vague than that, which is essentially that's basically what I gather, really. That's my take on it. Again, I don't know, relating back to like how it puts him like next to Luffy, or how it puts him in comparison to Luffy. I think compared to when Luffy uses advanced Conqueror's Haki, Zoro has to put far less of a conscious effort to cope whatever attack he's doing in Conqueror's Haki, because unlike with Luffy, Zoro has Enma, which passively takes away the Haki from him, okay? And in Zoro's quest, to stabilize his own haki, he lets Enma draw out essentially all of it without holding back. Essentially, he lets Enma take all of his haki, which would include Conqueror's haki if the user has that. So I'm saying that, you know, although Zoro can use advanced Conqueror's haki, it's far less of a conscious effort in comparison to Luffy, where he actually has to, coat his punches in advanced Conqueror's haki. And there's even confirmation from Luffy himself. I don't have it pulled up right now, but he does ask Kaido, so you can coat your attacks in Conqueror's haki, essentially. So that's confirmation right there that Luffy does know exactly what he's doing. But unlike with Zoro, we don't really have that confirmation that's as concrete as like with Luffy. So that's basically what I was trying to say here. And that, to me, gives a lot of opportunity for buffs for Zoro when he does eventually, or if he does. Let me say if, because I don't know if this is true or not. This is just all my theory, by the way. This is just all conjecture. But if Zoro doesn't know what he's doing, it does leave the room for buffs if he does actually know what he's doing in King of Hell, which is coat his swords in advanced Conqueror's haki. I don't know how it's gonna be done, but I'm just saying the opportunity is there. Okay, and then I think it's also like a difference in portrayal, right? Luffy knows exactly what he's doing with advanced Conqueror's haki, but Zoro seemingly doesn't, meaning that Luffy's use of it is probably more advanced and has more finesse compared to Zoro's. That's what I gather. That might be what Oda's trying to say. So, you know, my take of him being below the current base Luffy might have a lot more credence now, thanks, or according to this theory, if you follow it. But that's basically what I wanted to say. I just wanted to get my 2 cents on this little Vivre card discussion during this break week. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Go follow me, go subscribe. Yeah, that's all for me. Bye bye.